I'm going to talk about 5 different Fujifilm autofocus setups that I use for challenging scenarios as a wedding photographer, portrait photographer, and just a dad. Okay, so first things first, I want to put a disclaimer. I am not going to be held liable if you get an out of focus shot in a critical situation. These autofocus setups are based on what I've experienced and what I've known work for me based on shooting with the XT3 and the kind of like quote unquote slow large aperture primes of the Fujifilm system. So these are the settings that I use and they work really well, and I've been able to deliver critical shots to all my clients. If you try them and they don't work out, you might need more practice. You might have a different lens that operates differently, but if you are lost for starting points with shooting with Fujifilm cameras and getting the correct autofocus dialed in for challenging scenarios, you're going to want to keep watching this video. So the first most commonly used scenario is just portraits with a large aperture or kind of like low light shots that are kind of like candid documentary, something that's like not moving too fast that people are generally staying in the same spot. You're going to want to use AFS, autofocus single, and I try to use the smallest point possible. So single point, the smallest point, usually the smallest one up to like the third size up, and that's generally where I try to live at. And what I do is I put the focus point on the eyeball of the main subject that I'm shooting. That's just pretty much it. So if I'm shooting a couple like a bride and groom, I'll probably put it on the bride. If it's somebody having a candid situation, I'm going to put it on their eyeball there. That's generally what I'm doing. People ask like, oh, how do you decide how to move it? How do you move it quick enough? I literally just practice and I start moving with the little joystick and I move it to the correct spot. There's no other secret behind that. Just again, you're going for the smallest point because it's going to give the least amount of calculations for your camera to kind of calculate. And then single point just in general focuses a lot quicker and faster and more reliably than the autofocus continuous that I've noticed in low light situations when it comes to Fujifilm cameras. Another thing that you need to do too is because you're shooting in low light, because you're shooting with a large aperture, you want to make sure you acquire and require autofocus all the time, even if you're not going to take a shot. I'm usually just kind of like hot pressing, you know, like every couple seconds or so, just to make sure I'm reacquiring it so that I'm adjusting every single time that that person moves just a little bit or slightly, or maybe they laugh or whatever, acquiring focus right before I'm going to take the shot. Also, just take more shots than you need because you can always have more insurance. You can always delete the other ones later, but you can't have any excuse for an out of focus shot. So the next, and I think the most probably challenging scenario, especially for wedding photographers, is low light movement. So predictable movement in low light, for example, the bride walking down the aisle or a slow dance or something like that. What do I use for those situations? Because I need to soak in a lot of light, probably use a larger aperture, higher ISO, but they're moving. So it's going to be difficult to track, right? So what I usually do is I try to do autofocus continuous in single point. I know it's a little scary, but like the bride is walking down, you can use probably like a single point smaller kind of like on their face as they're walking down, and as they get closer you can make it a little bit larger and put it on their eye, and it just comes with practice. That's how I used to shoot with the 56 1.2 and nail 1.2 shots as the bride was coming down. If that's too hard for you, you can enlarge it to the zone focus, so the 3x3 zone focus. Just try which one works for you, but I feel that the single point, if you can be well at manual tracking, it's a lot more accurate, but it just takes a little brain work and practice. Another important thing is you want to set AFC to custom setting set to, which is to obtain autofocus but ignore obstacles. So if somebody walks in front of your lens, it's not going to continue to track that person because you're intentional about the person that you're tracking. So the next other challenging thing that people ask me is like, what do you do about low light, fast paced action? Something crazy moving fast, like an entrance, very energetic first dance. So that is where I for sure go to AFC on the zone focus. So the 3x3 zone. And what I'll do is I kind of try to predict where I want to position the subject within my frame, whether it's the center, the left or the right, the top or bottom or whatever. And I'll manually move my zone focus area to that spot and then pan my camera so that the subject is in within that. And then I'll track with my hands manually to track the subject in there. And what you want to do again is put that just on their head or closer to their eyes, and we're going to be on AFC continuous. You want to make sure your shutter speed is fast enough. So if it's really fast action moving, you want to be at least 1/160th or faster, maybe even like 1/250, something like that. Or if you're using flash, that's going to freeze it and that gives you some leeway with your shutter speed. But you want to also set AFC continuous setting to set 5, which is the erratic movement, and that's going to be unpredictable movement because they might come in and out, whatever. whatever. That will give your processor a little bit of boost to make more calculations when it comes to distance and left and right and things popping in and out. If you do see that you're struggling with a low light tracking movement, stop down your lens just a little bit. Just do it. Like if you're shooting at 1.2, then shoot at 1.8, something like that. It's going to give your camera a little bit of breathing room to make some errors so that you can continue to capture the moment without it hunting back and forth. The next situation is kind of like tracking a stationary scene, but having a subject like moving across the frame. So I like to do a lot of silhouettes or long shots where basically somebody's just walking across the frame like that. So how do I focus with those? So that is the time where I actually take use of the AFC wide tracking. And what I do is I will set the scene, I'll set AFC to wide, and then what I'll do is I'll manually move that one single point over to where the subject is, and then I'll ask them to kind of start walking, and then it'll start manually tracking them across the frame. As long as they're not moving super fast, it does really well. Trust me though, it is not magic, so don't try to get somebody like that. Like it might not track them that well, so you want to make sure you use some insurances when it comes to that kind of thing. Either set focus in manual focus and then lock it there, or take multiple takes of the same shot, something like that. You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket and just trust that the Fujifilm autofocus system is going to do it correctly, because it might not. And in general, that's just a good practice with any camera system in general, right? You want to make sure that you're taking care of getting your deliverables instead of just assuming it's going to get it. So the last challenging scenario is when it comes actually not to my wedding work, but my personal work, taking photos of kids, toddlers, running around, crazy, chaotic, all that kind of stuff. What do? When it comes to personal work, I'm not trying to catch every single moment. I'm trying to relax. So I'll shoot in IAF or iAuto, whatever, face eye auto detect. I don't know what it's called. I'll put it down below what it actually says in the Fujifilm menu, but I'll set it to either AFS or AFC. I'll shoot it to AFS if I'm just, they're just eating breakfast, nothing too crazy, and I want to focus on that kind of stuff. If I'm shooting with a large aperture prime lens like the 51.0, I might set it to single point, but most of the time it's face and eye auto turned on. And then if I'm doing anything outside, like playing, they're on their bikes, I will set it to the erratic mode with the face and eye auto, and that will help me get the kids in focus a little bit more, right? If you need to, again, stop down the lens a little bit. If you're shooting f2, 2.8, stop just assuming the camera will do the work for you. Just give it a little breathing room, right? AFC, face detection on, eye auto. That's generally how I photograph children or my own kids or whatever. Follow and keep up with the subject. If they're doing a predictable motion, they're biking back and forth, just predict that situation and focus with them rather than against them, and keep shooting all the time. You might not get every single photo when you're taking photos of kids, so you want to have a situation that you kind of want to be like a fisherman and wait in the spot and kind of wait for them to go into the right light composition, and make sure your shutter speed is appropriate. If you want motion blur or if you want to freeze it, just make sure it's appropriate. And with the face eye detect or whatever on Fujifilm cameras, you'll get the best results with later gen cameras. So the XT3, the XT4, XS10, XT4, all the stuff that have the newest algorithm will do better. If you have the XT2, XH1, the face and eye detect is not as great. So don't expect that that's going to do as well. And also when you pair it with the newer lenses, those will do a little bit better too. So your mileage will vary with the gear, but I'm hoping that these 5 scenarios will help you get more keepers in these challenging types of photographic shots, photographic scenarios, whatever. If you have any questions about what I do, or if you have a different scenario that I didn't cover, leave it down in the comments below. What is your favorite autofocus mode on the Fujifilm system, as well as what do you shoot? Maybe also include the lens. That way we can understand what combinations work, and maybe if you have one that just doesn't work, let us know down below. Let's make this video a good resource for anyone trying to get autofocus in a challenging scenario. What do you say? All right, as always, be sure to subscribe if you haven't already, as I make a new Fujifilm video or photography video every single week. And if you don't want to wait that long, please follow me on Instagram. I make new tips, tricks, and tutorials every single day on Instagram. If you're not following me there, your photography is lagging. I really help to level up every photographer that follows me on Instagram. And that's it for me. Remember to get out, go shoot, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Another cool trick too is make sure,